Hey everyone, this is Al.
And I'm Tim. It's good to see you.
And we are in New York City in Tim and Anna's apartment here in Brooklyn. And Charlotte and I have just spent almost 5 days here and really enjoyed it. Like every other time we've sent a video from here, I am full to the rafters, and I have eaten plenty. But thankfully, we've walked a lot as well, too. So hopefully we burned off a few of those calories, but it's been great. It's always great to see you. We have been going through the book of Jonah. And Jonah is such a wonderful book. And as I've stated in a few of my posts, it's so much more than a man being spit out by a whale onto the shore. It's so much more than that whale and Jonah story. And really, Jonah has so much to it that truly connects to the New Testament. Jesus obviously referred to Jonah, and I do believe that Jonah in many ways represented the Pharisee of Jesus's day. And the reason that I say that is that Jonah was able to basically put a whole group of people into one big category, consider them completely unworthy, was willing to cancel them, and was really upset when God decided to do something good on their behalf. And so, to me, it's very, this is typical New York. So if another siren goes by, just don't even blink, just keep going. And because for me, as I read Jonah, and probably just like you, when you read it, it's very hard to be a believer in Jesus and to think that you would be really upset with going somewhere, preaching the gospel, and 120,000 people get saved, change their lives, change the way that they do business, change the way that they do everything, and you be so upset with that you would rather die than live. That just blows me away. I mean, how can anybody have that kind of cold, callous heart and be religious at the same time? That's Jonah. That was the Pharisees of Jesus's day. And so what I wanted to do today was, as we complete going through the book, now that we've gone through it for 3 times, is really just dialogue with Tim about some of the things that are evident in a Pharisee's heart that we see from Jonah, from the Pharisees, and how does that apply to today? Is there the Pharisee heart in 2025? Where does it exist? And when it's in somebody's heart, what do they do? How do they treat others? So that's what I want to talk about today for a minute, okay? All right, so Tim, any comments or questions, or not questions, any comments on just what I just said about the Pharisees, Jonah, and today?
Yeah, I think when we started talking about this a couple of days ago, it just immediately was a compelling point, I think, that you were making. I could see it early on in just a couple of examples of just, this is what we see. We see a Pharisaical heart in Jonah, and then we see that referenced by Jesus, and we see it also in, I think, Paul in many ways, a pre-conversion, of his attitude towards, I'm going to persecute these Christians because it's sort of this ethnic cleansing type of thing. And so you start to think about other examples in our day, in terms of the political spectrum of things, in terms of how people approach it, how I think people can gain one identity and then be kind of sucked into an us versus them mentality, which is, the extreme of that is sort of that Pharisaical, wouldn't it be great if we just could eliminate this whole side of things? Instead of, I think you start to think about the Christian heart posture of, what can we do that's more sort of incarnational? How can I step into the situation like Christ did, into our mess of things, and the perspectives that we have, the hardened hearts, the Pharisaical hearts that we had, that we still deal with, and try to make a change. And I've seen some good material on sort of that flip in perspective of, I'm coming at this from a standpoint of, if I go into this situation, I'm going to become unclean. I'm going to become contaminated. And so I don't want to do that. I want to stay away from it. I'm going to push that away because I don't want to become unclean. That used to be, the Jewish understanding of a lot of things, why they had so many laws of cleanliness and different things like that. Jesus comes around and starts to be very revolutionary in sort of this, I'm going to go into situations and it's going to become more clean. I'm going to have these pockets of holiness within society instead of, thinking about it from I'm going to get contaminated by this. And so with, the Spirit of Christ within us, we can have that attitude instead. We can be more confident. We don't have to live in fear of that cleanliness because we've been cleansed, by the word. We've been washed by it. And so we can be ambassadors of that. We can go into different situations and, put ourselves in other people's shoes. We can, hopefully not be like Jonah and wishing, even when good things happen, we're like, oh, why did that good thing happen to those people? They're not our people, kind of thing. So those are even just a few thoughts that come to mind as we think about it generally. I mentioned earlier, as we were just kind of talking about things once again, of what are some other examples of this maybe in popular culture or other things like that. And so I thought of the Marvel, characters and the Avengers and whatnot. And now, you've got this character Thanos who wants to get that Infinity Gauntlet and just be able to snap and wipe out all the people that he, thinks is going to rebalance sort of the universe or whatever. And that's kind of another extreme example of something a little more Pharisaical of well, if they're not with me, then we have to cleanse it in this way, eliminate it, instead of, what if I were to sit down with that person, whether it's across the political aisle or across the religious spectrum of things, and to think of that sort of more, there's an opportunity for change, for transformation, and there's lots of biblical concepts about that, like the transformation of our minds instead of the conforming to the world, that type of thing. What is it that can be sanctifying instead of just eliminating? So those are a few things.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, those are the things that we've been discussing, and I think that there's different levels of that Pharisee heart. I mean, there is kind of the entry level where you're just judgmental, and you just look down on others, but you don't really do a lot about it. You might just say, I'm not going to hang out with them as much, or you don't get to the place to where you're not inviting them over for Thanksgiving or Christmas, but you might just kind of ignore some things or avoid some conversations, just because you see the differences there. But then, what seems to happen with Jonah, it got ramped way up to where he just wasn't even going to go to Nineveh no matter what, until he got thrown to the belly of a whale, and then he repented. And even when he repented, he went and preached the message. Great things happened, but the heart was still there. He still resented everything. In fact, God asked him twice, why are you so angry? Do you have the right to be angry at me doing something good to these people? And so the Pharisee heart can get ramped up. And that's what happened in the day of Jesus. So when Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees, at first it's like, man, who is this dude? And he's upsetting the apple cart here. He's going and spending time with sinners. And you know what? He's going to make us unclean. This is not right. He shouldn't be there. In fact, we're not showing up. What's he doing there? What's he doing spending time with a prostitute, with a tax collector? What's he doing that? How's he having a dialogue with them? Why is he even doing something good to them? We got to get rid of this guy. He's screwing up society for us. He was a threat to their power. And so it begins to get ramped up. And then what else did the Pharisees do? Well, they were getting upset with him. And it was like, okay, and then they began to plot, how are we going to get rid of him? How are we going to get rid of him and his followers? So they began to plot over a period of time. They tried to trick him. They tried to tell the authorities falsities, all those kind of things. They lied. They did everything to try to shame Jesus and his followers, to try to get other people in society to look at them and go, they shouldn't be here. They're the problem. We need to get rid of them. So they tried to then appeal to kind of to society, to get society on their side of things. Boy, and I'm sure as I'm talking, you're going, okay, I see all this going on, right? And so, and then they get to the place to where, okay, now, you know what, we've got public sentiment maybe against them. We've got some cancel culture going on here, but it's still not enough. Still not enough. We got to get rid of them. So now they appeal to the courts. They go, you know what, now we got to bring him before we either got to put him in jail, or ultimately they wanted him dead. They wanted him completely because he was a great threat to them. And so now what they do is they take that Pharisee heart, they try to influence others with it. They try to go to the power authorities of their day to eliminate or cancel that particular part of society. And they'll do whatever it takes. We watch religious people in the Bible, Pharisees, people of, quote, the law, lie, cheat, steal, and murder. Unbelievable. But that's what can happen in the heart of a Pharisee. And so the question that I think Tim and I have is, you know, where is the heart of a Pharisee in today's world? Well, anywhere that you see these things, that's the heart of a Pharisee. And the Pharisee's heart is cold. Jesus called the hearts of the Pharisees, he said, you were like whitewashed tombs. Your tomb is well taken care of on the outside. Beautiful lettering. It's all clean. It's the nice, like, wow, look at that tombstone. It's amazing, but it's a tombstone. And that's what he was telling the people, the Pharisees of his day. You were just like a whitewashed tombstone. Your heart was filled with death. And we see that way too much in our world today, right? And so just want to mention a couple of things that I have here, just to kind of put them in a few categories here, and then we're going to close, discuss a little bit more. But here's what I put down when it comes to a Pharisee's heart. A Pharisee's heart would rather eliminate than associate. Okay, they just rather eliminate than associate, and that gets itself worked out in cancel culture. That gets itself out in ignoring others, disavowing others, browbeating others, belittling others. That's how that gets worked out. They would rather eliminate and shame and somehow make sure everybody knows how bad of a person they are. So therefore it gives them a reason to not associate. Okay. Second thing is they wish judgment upon their enemies. Their enemies are completely morally bankrupt. You know, in some twisted kind of way, these Pharisees thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were keeping God and the world pure. And in some way, there are some people that have the Pharisee heart who actually think they're doing the right thing by saying these people are so evil to the world that we have to figure out a way to make them of no consequence because they're truly disrupting the world, their world, for sure. Third thing is the Pharisee heart loathes any success or anything good that may happen to their enemy. They can't even handle the fact that something good can happen or that their enemy can be of any kind of success. There's no way that they can ever say something good about that person, because then it makes them sound like they actually like that person. Hey, the Pharisees did that to Jesus. There was nothing good they could say about him or his followers. Nothing. Okay? And then they encourage others to disavow and will condemn people who associate with their enemies. That was another part of it. Again, they were trying to intimidate. There were many believers in Jesus during Jesus's day that it says that they were afraid to say so. They were afraid to say it because they were intimidated by the Pharisees, and they were also, the Pharisees were going to threaten certain financial things, jobs, home, family, whatever it might be. There was this fear factor that they held over people, so therefore they didn't say they believed in Jesus, they just quietly did it in their heart, okay? And then the last thing is, they will attempt to convince the ruling powers that their enemies are lawbreakers and they're bad for society. So those are just some ways you can look at the heart of a Pharisee. So we want to ask you, where do you see the heart of a Pharisee? And Tim, what do you think that at this point we could encourage people that are listening to do to not become Pharisaical themselves? Because we all have a little Pharisee in us. Okay, we all have this little, like, I got this thing going right and you don't. We all got a little bit of that in us, right? And we all have sometimes even more of it in us than what we want. So how can we keep it out of us? And then secondly, when we see it in culture, what is it that we can do?
Yeah, great questions, very practical questions. It's interesting that as you were talking, my mind was also going to the whitewashed tombs. That's what was coming to mind, and I think that could be one angle to really continue to think about as you just interact with people, as you interact with media, as you're scrolling, as you're viewing videos, whatever it is. You know, is there something that irks you and, you know, makes you want to kind of say, oh, like, that's not me. Like, I want to ignore that, or I wish that wasn't a thing. You know, thinking about different political issues, whatever it might be, and just kind of checking yourself and saying, well, why is that irking me in that way? Is that an appropriate reaction? Or should I really be tuned into this to see what their perspective is, so that I can do more associating instead of eliminating, you know, or looking at some of those different things. And maybe we can, you know, post some of those different, you know, things that I'll kind of lay out there, and just be able to use that as an evaluative criteria to say, am I on the right side of this? Have I been ignoring this for too long? Have I been ostracizing this group or this person? Am I ignoring the potential for their transformation? And am I having a hard heart towards them, towards that issue, towards whatever it may be? That may be one helpful step to take, I'd say. And then, the other question, when you see it, how do you point it out? You know, or if you experience it from others, how do you engage with that? That's difficult, and I could think of some examples, even in my own family, of that happening, you know, to people. And so, it's hard to wish good upon those who don't wish good upon us, or heap, you know, difficulties upon us, challenges. But that speaks to the importance of being rooted in faith, and, you know, whether we are whitewashed tombs or not, I guess, you know, in terms of what's inside of us. Are we going to combat right back at them with something that's more hurtful, harmful, or can we take the high road, you know, and simply kind of say, you know, well, this is my perspective. You know, I'd be willing to engage with you in a deeper dialogue about this versus, you know, you just writing me off or calling me that name or whatever it may be. Thinking about, you know, I guess it's the old "what would Jesus do" type of thing, but we are able to engage in those ways more depending on how rooted we are in God's word and what it says, so that we have a greater aptitude to be able to, again, I'd say, associate instead of just eliminate and ignore. So
you know, one thing I thought of is that you know, as we're dealing with people that might have a Pharisaical heart, one of the things that I've at least thought about doing, and I try to do, is just challenge them to think deeper about what they've said, to look at other sources. You can't just stay in a bubble and watch only one channel sometimes to get the right perspective. So So a lot of it is thinking through what's truly happening, and am I truly being objective in what I see? So for me, just being able to have those kind of dialogues, I think most leaders, especially ones that know how to get a crowd going, count on the fact that people that are listening are just, and I put this in a negative term, a sheep. They're not going to go very deep. They're just going to follow. And they're not really going to think through. They're not going to really logically try to say, well, what does that all mean? How does that all play itself out? I don't see everything that way. What is it? So they have, so in order for somebody to not have that Pharisaical mindset, they've got to be able to have an open mind, and they've got to be able to think through. And so I try to challenge people to think through. Think about this. Try to pose questions that challenge maybe the way that they think, or people do the same thing to me, posing me questions that challenge the way that I think, and have I truly thought this through? And then also just appealing to human kindness. So for me, I had a conversation with a guy the other day, and it was just like, I was just appealing to, we as humans, can we do this? Is this really what we're supposed to do, is to cancel people like that? Because it's just not. And especially if you're a follower of Jesus, no, doesn't work that way. He associated, he didn't eliminate. So they eliminated themselves. He didn't eliminate them. He gave everyone the opportunity to come. Everybody. They make their choices. He didn't eliminate before they made a choice. He gives choices. They eliminate themselves by saying, I'm not going there with you. But he gives everybody the opportunity. And so I think that if we do the same, we give people opportunity, but they're going to make their choices. And they eliminate themselves is what they do. And but I can't judge them away. I can't cast them out of society. That's for them to make their choices to say, I'm going to exclude myself from everybody else that I see in this world, except for this little pocket of people that think just like me. And that's to their detriment. Any other thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I mean, that's to their detriment, and also just the detriment of God's mission, to be, as public as possible with the gospel, essentially. And we see that in different waves kind of throughout Scripture, where he starts to make his initial public offering, if you will, to, when sort of, we've got Rahab, and then, there's some different things where the kingdom is starting to come, and it kind of pulls back, and then once we get Christ, it's public now, and we've got, everyone is invited, and so, yeah, so when you close it off, it's so opposite of God's mission.
Yeah.
So that's where we're.
Yeah. As believers in Jesus, it's Jesus first, it's family, it's vocation, goodness of society, and then politics comes in. Politics is supposed to be a support, not the lead. It's supposed to follow rather than lead everything. And what we've gotten in our world is now even believers who really, Jesus is way below whether it's being a Democrat or a Republican. That becomes first, and Jesus is somewhere in there, even though they say they're a believer. But it's all driven by politics, and that's not what Jesus wants us to do at all. So anyway, God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed going through Jonah.